Even in the United States, the Vietnam War is considered one of the biggest foreign policy failures in history. This campaign is remembered not for heroic feats, but for countless war crimes and some of the most devastating bombings ever, which killed at least 2 million civilians. Why did all of this happen? What was the real reason the US invaded Vietnam? South Vietnam is the first domino. If it falls, the rest of the free world will follow. Why did the war continue despite widespread protests? A hasty withdrawal of troops would allow the communists to repeat the massacre that had occurred 15 years earlier. Did the Soviet Union secretly participate in this war? We weren't just fighting a war, we were carrying out a peacekeeping mission. And why do Americans still feel so embarrassed remembering it? Being in a foreign country with a completely different climate, the psyche just couldn't handle it. And that's how these horrific crimes happened. Now, let's dive into the full story. Theory of everything: the fight for freedom. For most of its history, Vietnam was under the control of foreign powers. Up until the 10th century, the region was part of China. It wasn't until 968 AD that an independent state finally emerged, Dai Co Viet, the Great Ancient Viet. In the 19th century, Vietnam was colonized by France, and during World War II, it was occupied by Japan. Throughout these centuries, the Vietnamese people developed a growing sense of national identity. They longed for freedom and sought their own path for the country. This marked the beginning of Vietnam's struggle for independence, though at first it achieved little. The turning point came with the rise of Ho Chi Minh. Probably the most multicultural figure in Vietnamese history, he traveled across continents and lived in multiple countries. He was in France, helped found the French Communist Party, and even spent time in Soviet Russia. Ho Chi Minh, born Nguyen Sinh Cung in 1890 to a family active in the anti-colonial movement, set out on a 30-year journey around the world after leaving French school and working on a ship. Ho Chi Minh aligned himself with communists in Paris. He studied Marx and Lenin, seeing their ideas as the key to freeing the Vietnamese people. In 1923, invited by the Comintern, he visited Moscow and graduated from the Communist University of the Toilers of the East, becoming a lifelong committed communist. Returning home in 1941, Ho Chi Minh founded the League for the Independence of Vietnam, or Viet Minh. Its goal was to unite the people in the fight for independence and to establish a new government, a democratic republic. Socialist ideas quickly spread across Vietnam, including in the south, still under French control. However, liberation was still far off. Everything changed in 1945 when Japanese troops invaded and disarmed the French. By the summer of 1945, the French were disarmed and Japan effectively controlled the country. But Japan's surrender came quickly after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August. Ho Chi Minh, skilled at seizing the moment, launched what became known as the August Revolution. On September 2nd, 1945, Vietnam declared independence once again, though no country, including the USSR, recognized it. The French, unwilling to lose their colonies, reoccupied the south. In response, Ho Chi Minh, now head of the provisional government, proclaimed the creation of the Independent Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRV, in the north. China, the USSR, and other socialist countries recognized the DRV. From that point on, Vietnam's local struggle for liberation became intertwined with the global Cold War. Consequently, American support for the French increased, first economically, then militarily, and finally through technical and advisory assistance. Clash with the US, the domino theory, and the Red Threat. Ho Chi Minh sought to unite Vietnam under his leadership, while the Americans were determined to prevent this at all costs. In their view, Vietnam's fall would trigger a domino effect, with communist regimes spreading across Southeast Asia. South Vietnam is the first domino. If it falls, the rest of the free world will follow. After South Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh would advance to Cambodia and Laos, then Thailand, and eventually threaten India and beyond. Northern guerrillas began raids into the south to overthrow Ngo Dinh Diem's regime. Their routes eventually merged into what became known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail, running through Laos, bypassing the demilitarized zone, and reaching Cambodia. Hidden in dense jungles, the trail was invisible from the air. In the early years, guerrilla activity mostly targeted local officials. By 1960, nearly 1,500 government employees and civilians had been killed, according to US research. That same year, several guerrilla groups united under the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, also known as the Viet Cong. This prompted the US to deploy troops to South Vietnam, which soon exceeded 500,000 soldiers. In November 1963, a military coup in South Vietnam overthrew and killed Ngo Dinh Diem. The resulting power struggle among military leaders benefited the communists, who began to strengthen their presence in the region. The US sought to fight the so-called Red Tide, but faced major obstacles due to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Americans realized they needed to cut off the flow of resources from North to South Vietnam and looked for a pretext to escalate their involvement. This led to the famous Gulf of Tonkin incident. On August 2nd and 4th, 1964, US sources claimed that their ships in international waters were attacked by North Vietnamese patrol boats. The Vietnamese denied any involvement, but the US used the incident as a casus belli, launching attacks on northern regions. In the United States, the events were portrayed as an attack on the country itself. Public outrage followed, and on August 7th, Congress passed the Tonkin Resolution, granting the president authority to use military force abroad. As President and Commander-in-Chief, I must inform the American people that hostile actions have again been taken against US ships in the Gulf of Tonkin. Today, I was compelled to order the US Armed Forces to respond. The response was Operation Pierce Arrow, in which US aircraft bombed coastal military bases. This marked the start of a prolonged aerial campaign. Over 8 years of war, the US dropped roughly 8 million tons of bombs on Vietnam. But what were Americans really fighting against? The rifle is my best friend. The US claims to fight for freedom. Beyond the stated goal of containing communism, the US claimed to protect the people of South Vietnam from northern repression. A premature withdrawal of troops, the argument went, would allow communists to repeat the massacre from 15 years prior, which had claimed over 50,000 lives. Hundreds of thousands more had died in forced labor camps. Scholars remain divided about the North Vietnamese government of that era. Some praise its fight against French colonialism and American imperialism, as well as its vision of a society built on equality and fraternity. Others criticize Ho Chi Minh for terror, repression, propaganda, and the enormous loss of life. In Saigon, state security agencies were established along Soviet lines. Prisons filled with political prisoners and labor camps were created. Even French prisoners were treated harshly. During land reform in the mid-1950s, between 13,000 and 100,000 people, mostly wealthy landlords and peasants, were executed, while their land was redistributed to poorer farmers. Some historians argue that despite the bloodshed, the reform played a crucial role in shaping the outcome of the war, achieving economic success and uniting many poor peasants. Meanwhile, in the US, a campaign promoted the idea of fighting for Vietnam. "The rifle is my best friend. It is my life. I must master it as I master my own life." However, the war for a just cause quickly turned into what many consider genocide against the local population. While American forces conducted full-scale ground operations in South Vietnam, they largely avoided Northern Territory to prevent direct confrontation with the USSR and China, relying instead on air power. Bombing campaigns targeted roads, factories, and any infrastructure, but often struck civilians as well. Despite relentless airstrikes, the North Vietnamese resisted fiercely, using the terrain and jungles for guerrilla attacks, forcing Americans to escalate their tactics. In 1961, the US first employed scorched earth tactics, spraying a mix of herbicides known as Agent Orange over Vietnamese forests. The chemical defoliants destroyed dense vegetation that guerrillas relied on for cover, but they also caused long-term harm to humans, both Vietnamese and American. Victims suffered from cancers, chemical-induced AIDS-like illnesses, and genetic damage. Napalm was another weapon used extensively. Its gel-like gasoline adhered to surfaces, burned at extreme temperatures for prolonged periods, and left no chance for survival. Over the course of the war, roughly 500,000 tons of napalm bombs were dropped on Vietnam. Yet even these horrific weapons failed to achieve the military objectives. The Viet Cong continued to advance. In November 1964, Bien Hoa, one of the largest US air bases, was attacked. The Pentagon prepared a retaliatory strike, but meanwhile, Viet Cong operatives carried out a Christmas attack on a hotel in Saigon, where US military advisors were celebrating. A suicide bomber detonated a 100-kilogram bomb, killing several US officers. These attacks intensified hatred among American soldiers. Combined with harsh weather, oppressive heat, humidity, and swarms of mosquitoes, conditions took a severe toll on morale. Nikolai Kolesnik, a veteran who served from July 1965 to March 1966 as deputy commander of a Soviet anti-air missile unit assisting North Vietnam, recalled, "Always soaked, heart-pounding. It felt like being in a sauna around the clock. Mosquitoes, they call them moji, bit through everything, even clothes. The itching was unbearable, and when scratched, the wounds festered for months." Operation Rolling Thunder, traps, and Soviet support. In early March 1965, Operation Rolling Thunder began, a 3-year-long series of airstrikes targeting key Viet Cong positions. The operation gained notoriety for deliberately targeting civilians, bombing villages and cities, and destroying civilian infrastructure. US pilots also intentionally burned rice fields to cause famine. Estimates suggest that up to 200,000 civilians died under the bombs. Complete destruction. They didn't just bomb villages and towns, they even targeted individual farmers working in the fields. If a plane returned from a mission and saw people working, the pilot would either fire machine guns, launch rockets, or drop bombs on them. Viet Cong traps and guerrilla tactics. The Vietnamese responded to brutality with brutality. If Americans couldn't reach them from the air, the jungles made them easy targets. North Vietnamese command relied on stealth tactics, hit-and-run attacks, sabotage, and ambushes. To hide from airstrikes and secretly move reinforcements, the Viet Cong built extensive underground tunnel networks, complete with headquarters, field hospitals, barracks, and supply depots. Local villagers, familiar with the terrain, provided crucial support. Approximately 900,000 Vietnamese faced US forces. Due to poor infrastructure, American soldiers were forced to move mostly on foot. The jungles were full of dangers, including traps. One of the most infamous was the punji stake, concealed on trails near US bases with grass, leaves, or dirt. When a soldier stepped on it, spikes coated with toxins would pierce their legs, often causing fatal infections. Punji traps varied in size, from shallow pits to deep ditches, capable of trapping multiple soldiers. Another deadly trap was the bamboo trap, installed in doorways. Opening a door would release a spiked club aimed at the head or chest, often fatally. Similar contraptions were placed in trees along paths, triggered by tripwires. While these exotic traps caused damage, plastic explosives and grenades hidden along roads and trails were far deadlier, killing thousands of American soldiers, few of whom survived. At one point, the North Vietnamese even used decoy anti-aircraft missiles to fool US pilots. The rockets were made of bamboo and painted white to look real. They were rigged with ropes to move slightly, simulating real activity. The Americans fell for it and bombed these fake positions. Soviet and Chinese support. Despite ingenuity and strong morale, the Viet Cong struggled against the American war machine. Real progress came when China and the USSR entered the conflict in earnest. With the start of massive US bombing campaigns, Moscow and Beijing began supplying Vietnam with equipment and weapons. After a 1965 visit to Hanoi, during which Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin narrowly escaped a bombing, military aid to North Vietnam increased dramatically. Kosygin was furious. One of the world's top leaders was in Vietnam, and bombs were dropping nearby. He promised the Vietnamese full support, something he might not have committed to under different circumstances. From that point on, the USSR shipped heavy weaponry, around 100 anti-aircraft missile systems, 2,000 tanks, and 700 aircraft, including MiG-17, MiG-19, and the advanced MiG-21. Over 10,000 Soviet military specialists, anti-aircraft crews, pilots, radio operators, sailors, tank operators, artillerymen, signal corps, and medical personnel were sent to train Vietnamese troops in operating this equipment. Deployment was highly secretive. Soldiers were told they were on a special tropical assignment with combat-like conditions. There was a secret order. Our deployment was covert because officially we weren't at war in Vietnam. In reality, we were performing combat missions. Nikolai Kolesnik, a Soviet officer, was tasked with training Vietnamese soldiers to operate anti-aircraft missile systems within 3 months. However, language barriers and constant American attacks made this goal nearly impossible. Soviet advisors, American protests, and the war's outcome. Many Vietnamese soldiers and sergeants had never seen machinery more complex than a bicycle. Learning to operate advanced weaponry was extremely challenging. They asked thousands of questions, all of which had to be explained through Vietnamese translators who often lacked the technical vocabulary. Soon, training shifted to a follow-my-lead approach. Units had to defend themselves from American air raids just to survive. The first significant anti-aircraft engagement occurred in July 1965, when 2 missile battalions shot down 3 US aircraft with only 4 missiles. In memory of this event, July 24th is celebrated as Anti-Aircraft Missile Forces Day in the Vietnamese People's Army. After these early clashes, US air operations over North Vietnam paused for 2 weeks, and some American pilots refused to fly missions despite doubled pay, fearing certain death. Over the years, Kolesnik's battalions alone shot down 15 planes. Overall, North Vietnamese forces, using Soviet weapons and specialists, destroyed around 3,500 American planes and helicopters. We did what we were supposed to do. We weren't just fighting, we were performing a peacekeeping mission. The sooner the war ended, the fewer casualties there would be, on both sides. Out of over 10,000 Soviet personnel, only 16 died, thanks to Vietnamese protection during bombardments. The American home front. In the early years, the war had support from the American public. By the mid-1960s, growing battlefield losses and immense financial costs began to shift public opinion. Some soldiers even dodged the draft, fleeing to Canada and Sweden. After the war, I met with American veterans, some of whom were amputees, missing a leg or an arm. They had been through hell and came back changed. They acknowledged that the war was unnecessary, yielding nothing but loss. A turning point came with the Tet Offensive in 1968, marking the first major defeat for US forces. Although Americans eventually retook cities, the psychological impact was profound. For the first time, society realized that the Viet Cong could seize entire cities and that American soldiers were vulnerable. Protests surged across the US, culminating in the 1967 March on the Pentagon, with up to 100,000 demonstrators. Police and National Guard units tried to suppress the crowd, but the government refused to withdraw troops. Meanwhile, reports emerged of atrocities committed by US forces. One infamous incident was the My Lai massacre, where over 500 civilians, mostly women, children, and the elderly, were killed. The reasons remain unclear. Some suggest they were retaliatory strikes against suspected Viet Cong bases. Others, that it was revenge for guerrilla attacks. Gradually, the US began Vietnamization, transferring combat responsibilities to South Vietnamese forces while continuing to provide military support. Washington was eventually forced to enter Paris peace talks, which lasted 4 years and concluded in 1973. US forces withdrew without achieving their goal of halting communism in Asia. Vietnam emerges victorious. The Vietnamese believed in victory. Soldiers often told Soviet instructors, "You teach us to fight, but we learn from you to win. You defeated the fascists during World War II, and we will defeat the Americans the same way." During the war, US forces lost 58,000 troops, with 150,000 wounded. North Vietnam suffered over 1 million military casualties. South Vietnam, around 250,000, and civilian deaths nationwide exceeded 2 million. 2 years after the US withdrawal, North Vietnam took control of the South. The country achieved independence, became unified, and was eventually renamed the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. What might Vietnam have looked like if the US had won? Why did the United States fight this war? Were Soviet forces involved in combat? And should the US be held accountable for the Vietnam War's devastation?